Gamble on, fellas. Gamble on.
Welcome again to Gamble On, the weekly gambling podcast presented by USBets.com. I'm Eric Raskin, USBets managing editor and media director, and I'm joined by our senior analyst, Pulitzer Prize finalist, John Brennan. And John, last week you created an uproar among the listeners. Well, among one of our listeners, anyway. Our boss, Adam Small, who was floored to learn that you'd never seen The Godfather. Hey, it's only the greatest movie ever made, nearly 50 years old, and an essential part of American culture. No rush, John. But it led to a conversation between me and Adam about the movies we haven't seen that people are most shocked by. For him, it's Titanic. For me, it used to be Schindler's List, but I did check that one off several years ago. So now it's either Do the Right Thing or Apocalypse Now. It'll be hard for you to top The Godfather, John, but I know you're not a huge movie and TV guy. So is there something even more OMG in your arsenal for a movie I'll be shocked to learn you haven't seen?
Well, I'll say two things that I don't think enough people understand. One is that the idea that someone should pretend to have seen a movie or a TV show or read a certain book or whatever, like that they have to pretend is like ridiculous.
Right.
Obviously you're teasing, and Adam's teasing is good natured and it's fine. But I think there are people who seriously are afraid to say I didn't do this, or they're afraid to admit they didn't do this, which is silly. And then the other one, which is even dumber, is criticizing something you haven't seen. In other words, saying The Godfather, that's a crappy movie. I mean, I've never seen it. I know that everyone who knows anything about cinema says it's a masterpiece. So why would I dispute that? I don't dispute that. I'm sure it is. That's not particularly for me, but doesn't mean it's not a great movie. I believe that it is. I'll tell you, I saw Titanic the year I was engaged, and I will say that, spoiler alert, there's a scene where all hell's breaking loose on the ship, and there's a really old couple, like 50 years married couple, just lay in bed and hug each other. They're not going anywhere. Nothing else is said or needed to be said. And that's pretty powerful stuff, especially at the time. Now, I haven't seen any of the movies you mentioned either, by the way. But perhaps my claim to fame would be never having seen most trilogies or even sequels. So I saw Rocky when it came out. I enjoyed it very much, but I skipped all the sequels, including one they're apparently working on now. It's called Rocky 10, Rocky Goes to Hell. I don't think I'm going to do that one either. So no Star Wars, no Star Trek, no Lord of the Rings, no Harry Potter, no really any of the science fiction stuff. My oldest brother collected the golden era superhero comics of Marvel and DC in the early 1960s. And I loved those as a kid. I mean, it's amazing. And if I hadn't cut them out and ruined them, my older brother would be rich, but that's another story. But the only movie in that vein that I have seen in a theater was Guardians of the Galaxy, which happened to be the one set of characters I didn't know from the comics, ironically enough. I've also never seen a horror movie. I know the damsel in distress who's about to be on the business end of a carving knife is really just an actress playing a role. But I just can't derive any enjoyment out of the suffering of others, not even make-believe versions of that. But, such is the life of an empath. But taking this back to gambling, it's better than Even Money that I never see any of those nerd book science fiction movies. They just hold no appeal for me whatsoever.
Fair enough. Wow, a lot of stuff I have to drill down on there. First off, sure. I fully commend you for your honesty. Better to just say you haven't seen it than to try to lie your way through pretending you've seen something. Exactly. I don't know the point of that. Now, here's the key question, and it's going to be a bit of a loaded question, and I'll explain why. Is what did you think of Guardians of the Galaxy? And I'll tell you why it's a loaded question before you answer, so that you can answer with this in mind. It was edited by my brother Fred Raskin, so this is a Fred Raskin movie. So what were your thoughts? And I guess be gentle if you didn't like it.
No, I actually thought I wouldn't be able to understand what was going on, not only because I wasn't familiar with the characters, but also I think those superhero movies have a certain, cadence to them in general. And so most of the people that saw that movie have seen 20 other movies of that vein, right? So they know how it goes. And I didn't have that, backstory, but it was fine. I enjoyed it. It was kind of adventurous. I saw it with a young nephew of mine, and who enjoyed it. And yeah, I thought it was good. I think there's a sequel, which I of course haven't seen and I won't see, but
Right.
I don't know if he did that one too, but
He did.
okay.
The first one is better than the second, I think, but
Yeah.
the second one is funnier. If you're just looking for laughs, the second one is pretty good. But okay, no, that's a reasonable review. And I actually have missed most of the superhero movies myself. I've just seen a handful. I'm not into a lot of that stuff. It's funny that you brought up the Rocky movies, because I was listening to a podcast last weekend where a guy claimed he was the world's biggest Sylvester Stallone fan, but he'd never seen any of the Rocky movies. He's saving them. That was at least as shocking as your Godfather confession. Not that someone hasn't seen any Rocky movies, but that someone could self-identify as the world's biggest Stallone fan, but not have seen any Rocky movies. That one just knocked me to the floor, kind of.
Yeah, I remember it's going back to like maybe the 90s. There was one Bob Dylan album of his first like 15 that I hadn't bought and I hadn't listened to. As I figured, like in case he's got nothing left, I still have something to save. So I get if he said, I haven't seen Rocky 4. I'm just, as one, I want to have something or whatever. I haven't seen them all, so this way I can always, at some point when I really need it, I can see a new Rocky movie, new to me. But not having seen any of them, yeah, I don't get that either.
All right. Well, so the last, I know we should probably get on to real business at some point in this podcast, but I'm just curious, what have you been doing all pandemic, if not catching up on movies and TV you missed, like reading books or something wacky like that?
Well, I tape. Well, you don't like the word tape, but I tape old shows from when I was a kid. I went through a Charlie's Angels phase, and then
Okay.
Mannix, Cannon, Barnaby Jones, all the shows. It's interesting because they're mostly early to mid 70s, and just seeing the cars in the background, and even the occasional sort of inappropriate comments about whatever, nothing terrible, but just things you wouldn't say anymore. I found that's very soothing. So yeah, we all have our need to sort of escape from the cold, cruel realities, and that's kind of the way I did it.
All right, yeah, little off the beaten path of pop culture, perhaps, but you are vegging out and watching something, and that's what's important. So, all right, thank you to everyone out there for joining us for episode number 133 of Gamble On. If you missed any of our previous 132 episodes, they're all available on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. The only thing worse than not having seen The Godfather is not having listened to every second of every episode of Gamble On.
Oh, absolutely. And coming up a little later in the show, we're going to be joined by New York State Senator Joseph Addabbo, one of the legislators who's central to the push for regulated mobile sports betting and casino gaming in the Empire State. We're going to talk to Senator Addabbo about the legislative outlook and the battle to keep sports betting dollars from going across the bridge to New Jersey, without putting him on the spot about anything too sensitive, probably regarding the embattled current governor of New York. But first, it's been an oddly nostalgic week in the world of gambling, so let's get to it.
Here's your Gamble On News of the Week, an inside look at the biggest stories in the world of gambling.
We are recording and posting this podcast on March 11th, 2021, and you are surely reading, hearing, and watching a lot today about March 11th, 2020, as this is the one-year anniversary of the day the coronavirus upended life in America. We all have our memories of hearing about Rudy Gobert and Tom Hanks, but what we're going to focus on with this news item is the impact on March 11th, 2020, and the days and weeks that followed on the gambling industry we cover. It's crazy to look back and see how the sports betting world coped when there were no major sports, as everything from Belarusian soccer to table tennis had its moment in the sun, and table tennis held on to a small sliver of that moment, remaining the fourth most bet sport in Colorado as of the most recent monthly report. We had almost no live sports on TV, which meant weeks of reruns of classic games and eventually not so classic games, leading to the Last Dance documentary that felt like event television under the circumstances. We also had much consternation over what would happen with various futures bets on interrupted seasons. Then there was the devastating impact on brick and mortar casinos and the massive uptick in online poker and online casino play in those few states that allow those activities. Some of it's a blur. I've already forgotten a lot of the weirdness of those first couple of months of quarantine. John, what memories stand out to you? What do you find hardest to believe looking back? And all in all, has COVID-19 been more or less devastating to the gambling industry than you initially thought it would be?
Well, yeah, as it happened, I attended the Seton Hall Law School. I think it was called Gaming Compliance and Integrity Boot Camp, some sort of boot camp in Newark, New Jersey. That took place last March 9th to 11th, as it happened. But after going to the first day, on the morning of the 10th, the news broke about a massive horse racing doping scandal, mainly focused on New York and New Jersey, and particularly on Monmouth Park. So naturally, I needed to stay home that day and write several versions of that story. Now, the same day, tragically, the first New Jersey victim of COVID-19 passed away. And it was a horse racing trainer who I hadn't met, but I was familiar with his history. So I got a call on the morning of the 11th from my stockbroker, of all people, asking if I'd seen the news that had just broken. I had not. And he said, well, the name of the first victim was announced as John Brennan. I was jarring enough. I got some relieved looks in Newark when I showed up for day 3, March 11th.
Right.
People pretty much knew I had written about horse racing industry in New Jersey for many years, but I wasn't a trainer, right? But I guess they hadn't been 100% sure of that. So I sensed some relief. Now, those at the law school event that week were debating, should we shake hands or fist bump or what? We didn't know. And hours later on the 11th, as you know, the NBA suspended its season. So the whole thing was so strange. It's not a day I'm ever going to forget.
Right.
As for the U.S. gambling industry, I was surprised how resilient it proved to be overall. I mean, the closures of casinos and lack of traditional sports was rough, but I guess perseverance proved to be the trait that stood out to me. And now we're going to have 10,000 people per day at the Players Championship in Florida this weekend, and a 40,000 seat sellout for the Texas Rangers baseball season opener in a few weeks. We haven't made it to the other side yet, but I guess we can see it from here.
Yeah, I would say so. It's the light at the end of the tunnel that everyone keeps talking about. It seems to be getting nearer. And yeah, I mean, as gambling journalists employed by the particular company we're employed by, you and I are somewhere in probably the top 1% of not having our jobs negatively impacted by the pandemic. We were already working from home. Everything we do can be done remotely. The only real adjustment was shifting some of the things we cover and getting creative with some content ideas. I mean, we even did a little bit of writing about specific online casino games briefly in there to sort of keep the content moving along. That probably doesn't happen if sports are happening as usual. Jeff Edelstein wrote an excellent piece a few days ago for US Bets about how Korean baseball really emerged as a mental health savior for sports fans, sports bettors, DFS players, etc. last spring. I'd pretty much forgotten all about that. I'd also nearly forgotten that DraftKings got so desperate they were running DFS competitions for episodes of Survivor. It just one of those weird things that could only come along at a time like this. But all in all, the sports world has come through it pretty well. The major sports all did crown champions. I don't see people attaching massive asterisks to any of those titles. And sports betting, I mean, look at the monthly numbers. Basically, COVID was a small blip for a few months. And since August, since the NBA bubble began, really, interest has been astronomical. So again, we're lucky to be in the business we're in. If we can look back and just sort of chuckle about a few months of weirdness, that's a pretty good sign for us. That said, I'll never get back the hour or so that I spent watching NBA Horse. That was some serious suffering.
I actually remember that the original series from the 70s was on, and I used to enjoy that. But yeah, I understand that the reboot, I suppose, didn't work. But yeah, I think that there's always been a debate about whether casinos and the gambling industry in general, are they recession proof? And this wasn't exactly a recession, although it was many things, including that. But I think that the sort of need for people to have an escape in some form, including Mannix reruns, is always there. And the more stressful the situation, and it was incredibly stressful for so many people, gambling is going to enter into that. It's a bad thing if people are spending money they don't have, and it's probably a good coping mechanism if you're spending discretionary dollars to get through what's turned out to be a full year. And I think, for the most part, that's what people have done. So, and we've done whatever tiny part we've done to explain to people what their options are, what's going to happen next and all that. And that's a little bit of a diversion for people as well. So I guess we're contributing in that small way.
Yeah. All right. Well, we go from a global situation in our first story to focusing on one particular state for our second story. We're zooming in on Illinois, where we have two newsworthy items this week. First, on Wednesday, the state reported its January sports betting numbers. And because Illinois is always the last state to report, that means we now have the national total numbers for January as well. Sports betting handle for January in Illinois was a state record $581.5 million, which is remarkably close to overtaking Pennsylvania for third place in the country. Pennsylvania, which launched sports betting more than a year before Illinois, produced $615.3 million in handle in January. Illinois' huge numbers pushed the national handle for January to $4.36 billion. Illinois sportsbooks had an 8.24% hold in January for revenue of almost $48 million and tax revenue of $7.2 million. DraftKings is number one in the state in terms of handle. FanDuel is number one in terms of revenue, and they'll be getting a new competitor very soon. Our second Illinois news item is that Barstool's mobile sportsbook is launching in the state today, Thursday, becoming Illinois' sixth online book. And the state joins Pennsylvania and Michigan as states that have launched the mobile version of Barstool Sportsbook. We've talked regarding those other states about whether Barstool can challenge for the top spot. Any guess, John, how they'll do against the 5 other current sportsbooks in Illinois? And what are your thoughts on the January numbers? Is Illinois looking like a serious threat to catch New Jersey sometime this year?
I've spent a total of like a couple of years of my life in the Midwest without ever actually officially living there for a number of reasons. And, for better or for worse, I don't think the cultural vibe in Illinois and really most of the Midwest is liable to be as sensitive to the, sometimes insensitive comments by Barstool's team of wisecrackers. So there's less chance of a major controversy there than on, say, the East or West Coast. So that gives them a chance. But DraftKings and FanDuel are just so big and they're so good at what they do. I just don't see any way that anybody can take them on anytime soon. And as for catching New Jersey this year for Illinois, I'd say no. I mean, not as long as we Jersey folks rake in all that New York money that Senator Adalbo will be talking about next.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I am a little higher on Illinois' chances of beating New Jersey this year than you are. Maybe not like fully passing it, but like here are the state by state numbers for January. I think it's a good barometer month because there's playoff football, there's NBA, there's NHL. So New Jersey, number one, $958.7 million. Big drop off from 1 to 2, but Nevada is next with $646.5 million. Then Pennsylvania number 3, as I said, at $615.3, and Illinois close behind at $581.5. Then another massive drop off, Indiana and Colorado in the 300s, Tennessee 7th, Michigan 8th, and that will leap up very soon. This was just the first partial month. Michigan could be number 5 by February, and then we'll see where Virginia slots in as well. But it's really noteworthy how quickly Illinois has basically caught Pennsylvania. They're almost exactly the same size states. So you'd have to look right now and say, if anyone is going to catch New Jersey this year, it's Illinois. You're right that as long as New York hasn't legalized mobile, New Jersey retains a key advantage there. And when whenever it happens that New York does legalize mobile, Illinois might pass New Jersey, but not become number one, because New York would then instantly become number one. Anyway, I wouldn't say that I would predict that Illinois will have fully surpassed New Jersey with consistency by the end of the year. I would predict there will be at least 1 month in 2021 where Illinois is ahead of New Jersey, and that the two states will be running pretty close throughout football season. The fact that they're already about almost 2/3 of the way there to this early in the game, I think is a heck of a sign for Illinois. I guess one factor to watch is whether Governor Pritzker at any point fails to extend the pause on the in-person registration requirement. If New Year's users are forced some month to register in person, that would slow Illinois' growth. But it seems likely that the in-person requirement is dead in Illinois and isn't coming back. They just haven't made it official yet.
Yeah, well, I did a story this week that's going to be going up on cobets.com, one of our state websites for Colorado. And the reason is that Colorado actually is third in sort of betting per capita behind New Jersey and Nevada. And of course, Nevada is number one in that respect because they have very few people, and the vast bulk of their betting is done by tourists from out of state. And then New Jersey, again, gets the bump from New York State. So, Colorado, outside of those two outliers, is actually leading leading all the other states, including Illinois, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Iowa, and everything else, in terms of what probably is closer to being able to say this is how much the typical resident bets per month, and particularly in January. So a little bit of props to Colorado there.
All right. Well, Colorado ties into our third and final story this week. This story feels like a blast from the past in that we used to cover sports leagues partnering with sports books, but mostly stopped once it became commonplace. But this new partnership we're going to cover this week is a little different. Last Thursday, DraftKings and UFC announced a deal making DraftKings the exclusive sportsbook and DFS partner of UFC, worth $350 million over 5 years, this deal. We'll see how exclusive this agreement remains, as other leagues and teams have shown there's room sometimes for more than one sportsbook partner. One unusual aspect of the deal is DraftKings sponsoring something called the Fight Clock, which our colleague Brian Pempis, the staff MMA expert, says is pointless and is just a gimmick to put the DK logo on something near the cage. Brian also wrote for that same site you mentioned, cobets.com, this week about how the deal might seem excessive for DraftKings, given that MMA accounts for only about 1% of Colorado's sports betting handle. John, is there anything you find interesting about this partnership? And does it seem like an overspend for DraftKings, or do they just have so much marketing money right now that $350 million is no big deal?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, $70 million a year is pretty much walking around money for a company like DraftKings. And
Yeah.
What's amazing with them and FanDuel is that with the amount of money they spend, look at the return on investment. I mean, the old, you got to spend money to make money. These guys spend it. These guys make it. I also think you're spot on in terms of what does exclusive really mean. We've seen a lot of variations on that over the last couple of years. I'm a little skeptical of the deal being profitable, and yet over the long haul, I think MMA is here to stay and may continue to grow in popularity. So you're getting younger consumers who may be loyal to you for 50 years. So it's kind of hard to knock that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So regarding the exclusivity thing, Brian pointed out in one of his articles that UFC previously had a deal with PokerStars, which is under the Flutter umbrella along with FanDuel. It's unclear exactly where that deal stands, but we've certainly learned that nothing is ever truly exclusive in this space. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see a UFC FanDuel deal in addition to the UFC DraftKings deal. FanDuel just won't get to sponsor the Fight Clock. We know that much. But anyway, this is the DraftKings way. Spend big on marketing, build up the company's valuation while hoping to someday turn an actual profit. And sports betting is legal in enough states now that $350 million over the course of 5 years doesn't feel like much to spend at all. I think they'll get exactly what they want out of the deal. And the reason you mentioned is a good one, that UFC has a lot of younger fans and they could be building some brand loyalty that lasts for decades.
And I just realized we gave them a lot of free publicity for nothing at all. And what are we thinking? They're spending money like crazy, and yet we're doing this for free.
Well, yeah, I suppose we're this. They didn't pay directly for all this free pub that we're giving them, but we do work for an affiliate site that works with them and all that. So there's a little something in it for us too, I guess.
Okay, I guess so.
It's time to welcome a special guest from the world of gambling. Let's get to the Gamble On interview.
We rarely go more than a few weeks on this podcast without discussing the hopes for mobile sports betting or mobile casino gaming in New York State. But rather than limiting you to listening to me and John speculating on those topics from our perches outside the fray, this week, we're bringing you a guest who can update us all direct from the floor of the New York State Senate. He is the chairman of New York Senate Committee on Racing, Gaming, and Wagering, one of the driving forces behind trying to advance mobile gaming in the state, Senator Joseph Addabbo. Senator, welcome to Gamble On.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
So I think a lot of us could use a quick primer on how the New York State budget works. Is March the most important month of the year in that respect? What's the upcoming timetable as it pertains to passing sports betting and other online gaming legislation?
Yeah, it is important. Certainly a $180 billion budget that provides the services for the 19 million people in our state. It's quite important. And that's why we need to remain focused on doing the budget, which has an April 1st deadline. So right now we will start to negotiate in earnest all those pieces of the puzzle that put together make up the $180 billion budget, part of which I'm hoping it's mobile sports betting and the downstate licenses. The next time, I guess, the frame that we should be mindful of is March 15th. That's when the Senate and the Assembly come out with their version of the state budget. And between the Senate version and the Assembly version and the governor's version, which was released in January, hopefully a final budget by April 1st will be determined.
Okay. And so with that April 1st deadline in mind, if the budget locks in on that date and there is no mobile sports betting in it, is that it until 2022 or is there any way for progress to be made in the remaining 9 months of this year?
Yeah, I'm an optimist and I hate no for an answer. So, if it's on the budget, and it should be in the budget. I mean, when we talk about mobile sports betting for our state, as well as the downstate licenses, we're looking at a revenue for this fiscal year over $1 billion up front, guaranteed. And again, in a budget that has a $20 billion deficit due to the COVID pandemic, we can certainly use the revenue and the educational funds that come along with it. But if not in the budget, we can do mobile sports betting as a standalone bill. We did that in 2019, and the Senate passed it on the floor 57-5, passed it on the floor of the Senate in 2019, but it never passed the Assembly, even though there's enough support for the Assembly version of the bill in that House. So you can do it as a standalone, and then, of course, the governor would have to sign it. But because of its fiscal nature, because of its revenue generating potential, and of course the educational funds attached to it, it should be in the budget.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Senator, there are thousands of podcasts that are pontificating about Governor Cuomo these days, but this is a gambling-related podcast. So I really want to focus on mobile sports betting in New York State. And I understand the governor has an enormous influence on this issue and other issues. And I'm just curious, though, as far as sort of in Albany, how much opposition is there beyond Governor Cuomo in the state, in terms of the Senate, the Assembly in general? I mean, he's had some, concerns about it and whether it should go forward. And he's, loosened a little bit in recent months. But how important is he in the general picture? And is there any other opposition at the state level to mobile sports betting in New York?
Hey, John, we have Governor Cuomo, and we're working with him at this point. It's not Governor Murphy like in New Jersey. Governor Murphy, New Jersey really embraces gaming in terms of not only sports betting, mobile, and they're doing great, but also online gaming, online poker, and so forth. So we have to deal with the administration that we are currently have. And so we are working with Governor Cuomo. And there is apprehension about expanding gaming in our state, not only by the governor, but by members in both the Assembly and the Senate. And what we want to do is address each issue along. So if it's about addiction, we have certain measures in the legislative bill that is mobile sports betting to have safety protocols and measures taking care of addiction. Is actually a new funding mechanism for addiction services. There are safeguards in terms of capping of accounts. So we address the addiction issue, and I think we do it very well. But then there are those that philosophically say, I can't go with expansion of gaming in New York. But the issue is, if you want to help someone with an addiction, I think it's the way to go, because right now you can't help them because they're in they're going to New Jersey, or they're doing it illegally, and you don't know who they are. If you regulate it in New York, you can far help a person who has an addiction problem. We do gaming already in New York. We have casinos, racinos, scratch off, daily numbers. We already have gaming in New York. We just don't do it very well. So this whole idea about, I don't want to expand gaming in New York. Well, you already have it. And this is an industry that employs well over 5,000 people in New York State. It's an industry that has provided over $3 billion, at least in 2019, pre-COVID, $3 billion over to education alone, because a portion of our proceeds go to education. So, if you do everything right, you can address the addiction issue, you can address the job issue, you can address the education fund issue and the revenue issue. So many who didn't have a liking to gaming in New York now see it almost as a necessity, given the fiscal situation that the state is in.
I think that people who are not too familiar with the situation, I understand the idea that, gee, I don't want people to bet at home. Who knows? It's late at night or a weekend, and they maybe have had a few drinks, or they're going through a tough time with COVID and everything else, and they might be risking the mortgage. I mean, I totally understand any reluctance to want to let that happen. And yet, obviously, and people involved know that it already does happen with offshore illegal sports books and everything else. So it's not a question of whether we can prevent people from doing this. If they want to do it, they're going to find a way to do it. But when you speak to other legislators, I mean, how far have you gotten in the last year or two in terms of getting over that hurdle of respecting the fact that they wish this wouldn't be an option for some people because it's going to lead to problems, as you say, and yet also them recognizing that it's already there anyway. So as you mentioned, you can regulate it and have programs for compulsive gamblers and problem gamblers. Have you kind of jumped that fence with a lot of people, or are they still not quite getting it?
No, some have gotten it, and some who are reluctant to vote for mobile sports betting or expediting the downstate licenses have come and said, okay, we need to do this. We're losing money to Jersey. That's our money. That's our educational funds. That's our revenue. We're losing it to Jersey or illegally. So they want to do it. Again, there are those that philosophically have an issue with gaming, but what we'll do is we'll address their issues individually. And again, I think many of the measures or many of the concerns that they had are built into the language of the mobile sports betting bill. For instance, addressing the issue of minors possibly doing the mobile sports betting. Self-exclusion. If a person does see themselves gaming too much, they can self-exclude themselves. Or we can do it by putting a cap on their account. Additional reporting, extra money for educating about the pitfalls of gaming and the addiction, both addiction, post-addiction, and pre-addiction. All this put together. Why? Because we spoke to the advocates who are against gaming. We spoke to those who have, advocate about problematic gaming, and March is National Problem Gaming Awareness Month. And so we spoke to them and we included their concerns and addressed them in the bill. So again, I think it's going to happen. To your point, John, it's already happening. It's happening nationally. It's all over the place. It's around us. Let's do it. We already do a segment of it in New York. Let's do it right. By doing mobile sports betting.
So I'm curious about your personal connection to this topic of gambling, Senator. Resorts World Aqueduct and the iconic racetrack located there right in your neighborhood in Queens. And you are the leading voice for the expansion of legal regulated gambling options in the New York State Senate. So can I assume that you have a lifelong love for gambling yourself? And either way, how did you wind up in this particular role on this committee in the Senate?
I've told many I probably will not even make a mobile sports bet. I love sports. I fashioned myself an athlete. I used to play ball, and I love sports. But this is not about me. I did grow up in the shadows of Aqueduct. Aqueduct is in Ozone Park, my hometown. And I remember in grammar school selling the chocolate bars in front of Aqueduct because that's where people are. And those bettors like chocolate. And so we, selling chocolate in front of Aqueduct. So Aqueduct has been a part of my life practically my whole life. That's why it was important for us to save Aqueduct and getting the Racino there to help. But the idea here is it's not about me. It is about, in Resorts World, in my district, that's over 1,000 jobs for my constituents. And so for me, it is about being parochial and thinking about my people, my district first, and then statewide, how many more jobs we can create, how much more educational funding can we generate. And so it is about that for me. I don't like to see Jersey take our money, or Pennsylvania, or the illegal bookies, or the offshore online account. I want to have New Yorkers have a safe way, a regulated way of doing mobile sports betting and gaming in our state so we can protect them and give them a better product.
Okay, so you're not my guy to turn to ask how I should fill out my March Madness pool or anything like that. This is not your area of expertise.
I can't give you tomorrow's lucky numbers. I'm sorry, I can't.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, Senator, while the mobile sports betting aspect of whether New York is going to approve it, it's got a lot of national attention, mainly because it would be the biggest state to approve it, and it might open the door for other large states to do it. So that gets a lot of national attention. But also very big within New York State is the possibility of up to 3 New York City area casino licenses coming up for approval as soon as December of 2022. And I'm curious where we stand on that. Do Aqueduct and also Yonkers Raceway, which already have thousands of slot machines in each spot, although they're not full-fledged casinos. Do they automatically have the inside track on a license? And where does this stand? And do you expect some of these licenses or all of them to be approved in 2023?
I think the opportunity does exist for the expedited license, the graduated license, or again, the expedited implementation of these licenses, which if they sit on a shelf, they get active in the year 2023. But sitting on a shelf is over $1 billion in revenue, and then it costs, again, the educational funds and the jobs. So I think it is a great opportunity to talk about these licenses now being activated in this current budget, whether we talk about 2 or 3. And the idea here is how to figure out a clear, precise, transparent, credible process to implement these 2 or 3 licenses. So I think that's where we're at this point, discussing it with my colleagues in the Senate, with the Assembly, with the governor's office. But it is a discussion that's happening in earnest. This is definitely something that is, I believe, on the table for this budget period. Now, where do these licenses go? That remains to be seen with the process. If we look at MGM in Yonkers, and we look at Results World NYC and Ozone Park, Queens, the idea here is these 2 racinos are very popular and they produce a very good amount of revenue and educational funding. Results World alone, since its opening, has given $3 billion to education. That's just Results World since its opening. MGM is not too far behind. They're like at 2.6 billion to education. So these are educational fund generators. These are revenue generators. And like I said, locally, they're jobs, good, credible union jobs. So the idea here is, if you want to go speed to market, if you really want to maximize the potential for revenue, jobs, and educational funding in New York State, yes, to get either one of these already operating casinos up and running with a full license, that would be a consideration. But it needs to be a credible, transparent process that gets them there.
All right. Well, we had your counterpart, State Senator Paul Sarlo of the Meadowlands District in New Jersey, on recently on the podcast, and he talked about he does pay attention to New York State developments and whether there might be a casino in New York City. Obviously, Manhattan would be closest to New Jersey, and I'm just curious if you also kind of keep an eye on the Meadowlands in North Jersey. Obviously, they tried to steal the Yankees away decades ago. They got the Jets, they got the Giants. They got the Nets for a while until New York took them back, and they got the Devils out of Colorado. So, New Jersey has a track record for kind of jumping ahead of New York. And I'm wondering, do you keep a close eye on the political developments in New Jersey as Senator Sarlo does in your state?
Yeah, of course. Electeds always do that. We always look at other states and compare their legislation. And I keep a watch on Jersey's numbers all the time, actually. Our bill has certain segments of the Jersey bill, mobile sports betting, included in our bill. But you cannot help. We'll look at Pennsylvania and Jersey, and we look at Jersey because we're so attached at the hip. So we looked at Jersey. Say, for instance, January numbers. I don't think February numbers are out yet, but we look at January's numbers. January, Jersey does $82 million in gross revenue from sports betting. $82 million. Now, if I wanted to place a bet right now, gentlemen, if I wanted to place a sports bet right now, I got to drive 2 hours north because I'm in Queens. I got to drive 2 hours north to Resorts World Catskills, and I'm in person there in New York. 2 hours north. Or I can get my car and go maybe half hour from Queens to Jersey, half hour, and place a bet there. So when we look at Jersey and we see they did 82 million, we do know that Jersey does about 92% mobile. So of that 82 million, roughly 75 million is mobile, right? And of that 75, we know 25% is at New Yorkers. So of that money, $18 million from New York shifted to New Jersey. Mobile sports betting, $18 million leaving our state. That's a problem for me. So we do look at Jersey. We always do. And frankly, I understand there's a connection because when Results World in Queens opened up and we got, obviously those buses stopped going to New Jersey. All those buses who used to go to Jersey, now they have Queens and they go to Results World. And what happened right after Results World in Queens opened? The casinos in Jersey took a hit. Some of them actually closed. That's not a coincidence. So there is a correlation. And I do think when we do mobile sports betting, if we have the right product, if we have a premier product, which remember, gentlemen, when we do mobile sports betting in New York, we have to tell New Yorkers, hey, stop what you're doing currently. whatever you do, however you're doing it, stop what you're doing, come to New York, do it our way. And then we have to retain those New Yorkers that we better have a premier product for mobile sports betting. And so the numbers will shift. The numbers will come back to New York. And hopefully, like I said, New Yorkers will have a regulated, safe way of doing mobile sports betting in New York, in their own state.
Well, Senator, as a New Jersey taxpayer, I do appreciate your citizens' generosity in helping us with our budget.
Yeah, my pleasure. Always the season of giving here in New York.
Yeah. I'm just over the other New Jersey border in Pennsylvania, and I was along with my other people from my state. We were giving money to John's state for a little while there, and now we're retaining it. So yeah.
Look at that. I got two of my people that we constantly watch, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. Great. Thank you.
Well, it's been great talking to you, Senator. We'll cross our fingers and hope to hear good news about New York sports betting very soon. And hopefully we'll have you back on the podcast if indeed we get some good news in the near future.
Anytime. Eric and John, thank you so much. All your listeners, thank you so much. Stay safe.
Two men. $10,000. Will they run it up or blow it all? It's time to check in on the Gamble On bankroll.
5 in a row, baby. We booked a 5th straight winning week for the bankroll as the march toward getting back to even and not embarrassing the company continues. John, you had an almost dead even week. You won $125 betting on Matthew Fitzpatrick to finish in the top 20. Gave back $20 on Fitzpatrick to win outright and lost $110 dabbling in college basketball with a bet on Michigan State plus 11.5 points. So that's minus $5 in total. But I got us into the black on the week with my women's boxing bet on Claressa Shields to win by decision, a small wager there that won us $50. So that means we won $45 for the week. Not a massive amount, but enough to extend the winning streak. We're now down $611, plus we have $1,380 on hold and futures bets. So that leaves us with $8,009 available to bet with this week. And I'm up first. And tonight we have the first big post-All-Star break NBA slate. I thought about betting the New Orleans Pelicans over, as that has hit more than 71% of the time so far this season. But the number for this game is really high, 238.5 points. That's a lot of points. I'm going to stay away. Instead, I will go with the team I watch most closely, the 76ers. You probably could have predicted I'd go in this direction. Unusual circumstance tonight against the Bulls. No Embiid and no Simmons due to COVID contact tracing. And you might think that means, in terms of player props, bet on their third best player, Tobias Harris, to carry the scoring load. I did consider that, but his over-under on points is 24.5, just a little too high to feel confident about. The number I prefer is the number of points for Shake Milton, the point guard who usually comes off the bench and who comes the closest to playing the Simmons role when Simmons is out. His line is 16.5 points. He's going to get over 30 minutes tonight for sure, maybe 35 minutes. He's going to be driving to the hoop a lot. The over is even money at FanDuel. So let's bet $100 to win 100 on Shake Milton over 16.5 points. It's basically a standard DFS play. You know, the bench player getting an increased role, underpriced, becomes an automatic play in cash games. I think Shake is that guy tonight.
All right, sounds good. I've got to go with the PGA Tour Players Championship this week. $2.7 million purse. That's double what a lot of tournaments offer, and an incredible field. And I'll stick to focusing on the Thursday afternoon draw. So I'm going to go with Adam Scott plus 330 on DraftKings. He's only plus 260 on FanDuel, by the way, to finish in the top 20. So 100 to win, 330 for Adam Scott, the top 20.
All right. I like that. It's a nice, sounds like a good return there. I'm going to make a few small boxing bets this week. Me betting on fights to end in a draw is like you betting on outright winners in golf. One of these days we're going to hit, but until we do, we're kind of throwing money away, 10 or 20 bucks at a time. Two potential draws on the docket this Saturday. fantastic fight between a definitely future Hall of Famer and the possible future Hall of Famer, Chocolatito Gonzalez versus Juan Francisco Estrada 2. This is a rematch 8 years ago. They fought each other and Chocolatito won a close decision. Both of these outstanding little fighters often go the distance, and when facing elite opponents, it always ends up being close. So 18-1 on the draw there is a decent price. Let's bet $10 on that. Also Saturday on a different fight card, Terrell Gachet versus Jamonte Clark. Looks like a toss-up type fight. Same price on the draw, 18-1. So let's do $10 there as well. And then the one non-draw bet, back to women's boxing, rematch to... I'm not predicting anyone to get knocked out, at least.
That's involuntary. Yeah.
Right, I understand. This is the rematch to an upset from last year. Jessica McCaskill handed Cecilia Brækhus the first defeat of her career via close disputed decision. Brækhus should be extremely motivated for the rematch. And if it's close, the natural tendency for judges is to give it to the fighter who got the short end of the stick the first time. I think there's a tiny bit of value in Brækhus as a minus 150 favorite. So let's bet $75 to win $50 on her. And now that those bets are in, there will probably be one draw this weekend, and it'll be the Brækhus fight in which I didn't bet the draw.
Well, we got 5 winning weeks in a row. I think the karma's changed, so we might be fine there. I'm going to go a big 200 units, rare for me. I got the Cubs at minus 112. Plus 12.5 wins against the crosstown White Sox total. So we win if the Sox disappoint a little again, or if the Cubs are okay. And plus, we know we'll be in this one all summer.
Oh, all right. And so you betting like, are you betting like 224 to win 200,
yes,
something like
yes,
that? Okay,
exactly.
All right, I like it. John Brennan going big. Exciting times. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Gamble On. Thanks everybody out there for listening, and thanks again to our guest, Senator Joseph Addabbo. You can find me on Twitter at Eric Raskin and John at Bergen Brennan, and follow US Bets at US_bets. Go to usbets.com for all the latest news and analysis from the world of gambling, and subscribe to this podcast on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. And with that, John, please take us out.
Well, Eric, sort of a modest pet peeve of mine over the years has turned into a major piece of I'm going to call it annoyance this year. That is the insistence of most conferences in college basketball to allow a minimum of its top 8 teams, and more often every single freaking team, into their postseason tournament. I mean, you haven't won a conference game all season? No worries. Just pull off 4 upsets and you punch a ticket to the dance. And for the vast majority of conferences, you send home a team that had a very solid several months of basketball. Now, in a normal year, I almost sort of get it, See, I know convention of your particular business, after all. Everyone shows up, lots of dinners and drinks to be had, deals get made, Even for the athletes, they get to compete one last time and maybe spend a little quality time with players from other schools they've gotten to know or admire. And let's be honest, tickets get sold, the schools make extra money, expense accounts and midsections all get padded and so on. But it's 2021. It's a pandemic. I mean, administrators should not be gathering in one place to swap appetizers, pitchers of beer, and God knows what else. And athletes should not be spending time away from, college classes. Just get their asses kicked in probably the first, if not the second round of the tournament. I mean, Iowa State played last night. They were 0-18 in the Big 12. I mean, they played all 18 conference games because there's only 10 teams in the Big 12, and they didn't win a game. What are they doing? Air Force was like 2-15 or something. I mean, some of these teams are flying to their sites. They're not even just like taking a bus 20 miles. And so you know how many conferences, and there's more than 30 of them, made the decision to downsize their postseason tournament this year, making an adjustment for, COVID, pandemic? One, the Northeast Conference, which includes my alma mater, Fairleigh Dickinson. They only invited their top 4 schools into the tournament. Everyone else, what the hell were they thinking? I mean, there's nothing to be gained by having clearly terrible teams waste their time and take even a minor risk in this era. So, for many of the conferences, it's not even like most or any of the member schools can be wagered on legally by the residents anyway. So it's not even a fig leaf of, well, we got to keep the gambling machine happy. That doesn't even work. So basically, get off my lawn, NCAA. And with that, until next time, gamble on.